Well, hello and welcome to this episode of the Leadership in Aviation podcast. I am long overdue in having Trish Gilbert sit as a guest on the podcast. She has an incredibly busy schedule, and I am just thrilled to have her join me. Trish, thanks for taking time between urban air mobility and learning how to fly and having a family close by to meet with us today. I'm so excited to have you here on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I look forward to the conversation, and I do miss you. It's been a long time since we've seen each other.
I know.
Yeah, we get to see each other soon in DC.
I'm excited about that. And then hopefully we'll see each other soon flying too, because you're getting pretty close, aren't you?
I am. I just have some night flying to do and some under the hood stuff, and then wait to get my examiner scheduled. And then hopefully I'll be done at that point, and then start my IFR rating after that, my instrument rating.
Amazing. Moving right into it. So to give a little bit of background on why we're talking about our pilot's licenses, Trish and I served together on an FAA Women in Aviation Advisory Board. That's how we met. And during that period of time that we were completing that report, we were talking on a weekly, if not daily basis. And both of us were challenged as a part of being on that board to get our pilot's license. And then Trish, who knew way more about IFR flying before she started than I did, is moving right on to get her instrument rating. Trish has served as an air traffic controller, and in that world, as an advocate for other air traffic controllers for a lot of her career, and retired from that position recently and has all sorts of new activities. Trish, what in the world are you doing? And there's a new appointment that's been made. I want to hear about that.
Sure. I think first you mentioned air traffic control. That's where my heart has always been. That's what I still to this day feel so blessed that I found that profession and was able to serve as an active controller for more than 20 years in Houston, Texas, before then moving to Washington, D.C. and serving as the executive vice president representing the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, where I was an advocate on the Hill and the media and before our employer and the rest of government on behalf of women and men that serve as air traffic controllers and other aviation safety professionals in the FAA, in DOD, and in the private sector. So I feel really blessed and honored to have been able to serve in that role for more than 12 years. And now in retirement, I found my way into the international realm, and I serve on the board of the International Federation of Air Traffic Controllers. So Western Hemisphere is my jurisdiction. I'm the IFATCA Americas region, from Canada down to Argentina, all through the Caribbean, many countries that have different levels of representation as far as what their voice with the government and with their employer, different sophistication levels of equipment and training. So it's really challenging role to be in, but I love it because I love air traffic control in whatever country I am able to participate in, keeping very busy there. I miss the staff I had at NATCA. I had a wonderful, talented staff, and now it's me and some volunteers trying to do the international work, but I still enjoy it greatly. Recently, you mentioned I was just appointed by Acting Administrator Nolan to serve on the National Airspace Safety Review Team with a couple of very talented individuals that some I've worked with before, some I hadn't. We're tasked to look at the system, specifically the safety protocols, processes, principles that are in place with the FAA on aviation safety. Really focused on air traffic control piece of that, though, but the connectivity between the other side of the microphone with the pilots, and in line with some of the events that have occurred over the last 3 to 6 months that were closer than I think the industry is comfortable with, realizing that we are the safest system in the world. In the United States, we're very complex and very large, safest mode of transportation. However, because we are so safety sensitive, we continually look at processes and make sure that we aren't missing something, and what else can we be doing to enhance safety and keep the system the safest it can be. So we're going to start that work. We've actually started that work. Most of it's virtual so far. We're going to have our first in-person face-to-face meeting in Washington, D.C. in just a couple of weeks. We're going to start the work at the command center, where some of the other team members will get to see some of the FAA facilities for the first time, which will be a good baseline for them to start that work that we're going to continue through the next 6 months. At the end of that 6 months, we're going to provide some recommendations to the FAA on what we found out and what we think can be done differently or better, or maybe things that they're already doing that we can also be advocates to help, increase awareness and be there for them to support whatever they need.
Well, having worked with you on similar tasks, although not on safety, I know that you're an excellent choice for this. And I think that's one of the things that we really need to think about in leadership. And I love that you approach it this way. If you are already the best in the world, what do you do to stay the best? And I think that's one of the things that I heard you say that you're really looking at. So how do you approach that? If you were going to take the lessons there and apply those to leading a team or leading a group of individuals in a board or another organization, what lessons would you take from the United States approach to the safety of the airspace system into everyday leadership?
I think, and it's interesting, boards are all different, but in a lot of ways, they're the same, regardless of where they come from, their background, or what they're doing. Each individual on a board has different skill sets and contribute in a different way. And I think leading those teams, as you well know, you have to be able to recognize the strengths that you have on your team and utilize that team in a way where you can pull all the different strengths together and make sure that you aren't missing or don't have gaps, maybe fill those gaps where you need them. But then as far as processes go, I think you always have to start from what are all the things we're doing correctly, and noting the things we're doing correctly. Are we doing them in the way they were intended to be done? Are we frequently reviewing what's being done? And is there a good continuous feedback loop? A lot of things change just because a process or a program worked when it was implemented 5-10 years ago doesn't mean it's the same, it's working the same way as it did back then. So that needs to be a constant work. And I think, you start from the positive, what works well, and how can we improve? What else can we be doing? How can we make it better? Instead of trying to start from a negative place where, what's broken, because sometimes there's not anything broken at all. You just need to refocus some efforts and review some things that are in place already.
I love that. Gathering the data so that you can, all the inputs, it's got a little bit like flying, right? We're gathering all these inputs. We're doing a constant scan of our instruments and taking all of those inputs to make minor adjustments. That's how we stay aligned and with the right heading and the right altitude to arrive at the destination we want to arrive at. Although I will point out, because we learned this when we were working on that FAA board together, there are some processes that are a little more than 5 or 10 years old. Yes. Because the procedures for a medical exam to become a pilot, where all of those guidelines were put in place in the 1940s when people didn't have specialists and really didn't go for regular checkups. So sometimes there's 1 or 2 in there that's been there just for a long, long time that needs to be overhauled.
And that is a challenge, I think, in any board you're on, especially when you're working with the federal government, which I was, honored to be an employee of for 33 years before I retired. It is, and I think that's why this review team is important, to bring this outside look in to, ask the questions. Is it something just because we've always done it? Is this really the way you want to continue to do it? and maybe it's stuff they know already, but we can certainly, from the outside looking in, make suggestions and maybe have a little bit of a different perspective than maybe they do inside the FAA itself or inside the NTSB. And hopefully we can provide some good recommendations where that's concerned. The FAA certainly has its challenges, and not for any fault of their own. They are funded through the appropriations process through Congress, which doesn't always happen on time. They don't always get the budget they request, and it's difficult running a 24/7 operation like the national airspace that we fly in on a annual budget process that may or may not happen on time. So they do the best they can with the tools they're given, and they do it very, very well. So sometimes it's not easy to change quickly for them. And now, they certainly try. And those of us that have been inside and now outside do our best to be advocates on their behalf to ensure that we are the gold standard in the world, and we are. And so we're going to do the best we can to keep them there.
I love that. And I love your diplomacy, Trish. It serves you so well. One thing that I think is on a lot of people's minds as we watch all these emerging technologies come forward is how are drones or unmanned or unpiloted aircraft going to affect the safety of our national airspace? And I know that you've been working a lot in that area at the ICAO level, and you're also, I'm sure, looking at that as part of the Safety Review Board. Can you talk a little bit about, from an infrastructure and from a safety standpoint, the things that you're already anticipating with urban air mobility?
Sure. And it's very interesting because that is an important piece, I think, of, as I mentioned, not just what we have in place and what the FAA's always done with regard to safety and the protocols that they use and the processes they have in place. So since the jet engine was introduced into aviation, we haven't seen the potential for such significant change in the aviation system as we will see with the new entrants that are coming on board that want to fly in the skies above our heads, along with our traditional aviators, commercial airlines, general aviation, military. They are, there's a lot that they bring to the table, and they're going to change the way we see the system, but it will be safe. There is not an advocate out there from the new entrant industry to those that are currently in it that are willing to sacrifice safety to introduce any of these new technologies. So safety is going to be the number one priority. I do think that it will take collaboration at all levels, and that is occurring through what was the Drone Advisory Committee that the FAA DOT had set up previously. Now is Advanced Air Mobility Advisory Committee, meeting quite regularly. You mentioned ICAO and the work that they're doing to determine what procedures, what standards, what practices need to be put in place to safely integrate unmanned vehicles. Joining in that conversation or in that effort is the introduction of artificial intelligence, and what artificial intelligence will play. What role will it play in air traffic management systems? Will it replace the human? Will it just complement what the human needs? And will it just be part of better decision-making tools for the air traffic controller and or the pilot? Will there actually, in fact, will we see in 10 to 15, 20, 30 years from now, a human just supervising what the machine is actually doing? It's all very interesting conversations and dialogues, but quite complicated, but it will change our system as we know it today. Again, I think the important piece to that is you have the right people in the room having the important discussions to ensure that safety is the number one priority. And that's what we're seeing right now, is that is occurring at the international level and at the national level with the FAA and industry as well.
I love that. And I bet there's nobody with a differing opinion in there about unpiloted aircraft with passengers on board, about AI taking over for air traffic controllers. I can imagine those are some interesting conversations in the boardroom and then in the cocktail hours afterwards.
It is because, and I don't know that there's a disagreement that change will occur. I think everybody agrees things are going to change. The disagreement is in when and to what level. And then as long as we all keep safety at the forefront, I think that is the most important piece of the conversation, whether we agree or not. I think all of us are in it for the right reasons, talking about it for the right reasons, which is safety.
Right. I love that because it allows us to embrace the begin with the end in mind kind of mentality, which is always a good way to begin things and to have discussions about things, because then you can come back to safety as the primary objective here, and then making sure that we're not hindering innovation at the same time. I see such a neat balance in a lot of the conversations that I'm a part of in balancing innovation and safety and never losing sight of how amazing aviation is as an industry, not just for us in the United States, but for reaching people all around the world. I think it's just so powerful.
It is an amazing industry. I mean, aviation connects the world, and it is wonderful to be a part of that activity, even in retirement and all these and on different, teams and work that's being done to integrate safely unmanned vehicles, integrate commercial space, which is also a big piece of this new entrant conversation. The launches that are taking place today have 10 times more than just a couple years ago. That takes also a lot of coordination to keep those launches safe, the reentry safe. How do we do it so it doesn't inadvertently affect aviation that's in the system today? Meaning right now, when it initially started, we had to block off large areas of airspace so they could launch and re-enter safely. Now we have tools in place, very quickly put some of those tools in place quicker than we've seen the FAA do a lot of their procurement and implementation of tools that can help this kind of thing. They did it very quickly. So now we're able to reduce the airspace that's blocked, which means less of an impact or effect on commercial aviation that needs to fly through the system. It takes a team effort, and it takes strong collaboration. And this is not, decades ago when everybody kind of stayed in their own silo and kept to their own piece of the puzzle and didn't really connect that puzzle. It's a little bit different now. That everybody realizes, I think for the most part, you need all those pieces together to get the whole picture. And to do that, you have to create these forums and these teams to have that dialogue. And I believe there's a lot of effort to ensure that continues to happen.
I love that. Well, I want to flip a little bit to you learning to fly after you've been on the other side of the radio for decades. What was that like, being on the pilot side of the radios when you were first talking to air traffic control?
Well, it's completely different. And I actually wished I had gotten my private pilot's license while I was still an air traffic controller, or younger, when I was much, much younger. But you and others convinced me that, age is just a number, that if we set our mind to it, we can do anything we want. And so I stepped into that training and using my brain in a way that I haven't for years. That level of learning, even though I already knew pieces of the system from my air traffic controller background, there's still a lot to learn. And I love that. But I would say that I would recommend that air traffic controllers at least get a private pilot's license. It's not necessary and it's not a requirement, but it is helpful. It would have been so helpful for me to understand that side as an air traffic controller, yes, but also as a representative of the profession, to be able to know what it's like to not just sit in an airplane and travel back in business or in coach, but in the flight deck. And we do have training. Air traffic controllers get to sit in the flight deck and get some training. It's not a lot, but it is a little bit, and that is helpful. But I think learning what a pilot has to learn can also be very, very beneficial to that relationship between the air traffic controller and the pilot. I did learn that there are so many general aviation pilots out there that never talk to air traffic control. They actually just avoid getting, they stay in uncontrolled airspace or airspace where they don't have to, where there's non-towered airports, and there's a lot of them in our country, a lot of non-towered airports, and because they just don't want to, I don't know, they're afraid of them a little bit, but there's nothing to be afraid of. They're there to support and they're there to help the pilots. But I found there's a whole new world of pilots that never interact with air traffic control other than what they're required to do to get their license. Then after that, they stay out of it. And I wish we could break down that barrier where that exists. I was surprised by that. As I was learning to become a pilot, but I'm glad now I'm able to do it. When I was young, I didn't have the money to do it. And when I had the money to do it, I didn't have the time. And so now I have a little bit of both. It is a lot of time. And I am really, really pleased and happy that my husband of more than 33 years has also decided to get his pilot's license. And so we're doing this together and plan to do some flying together.
Now, he was an air traffic controller as well. What did you have, like vector pillow talk at all? How was that working in the same business together?
Well, that's interesting because he was about 7 years in when I was hired. So I was going through training while we were dating. And I think I was probably still going through training when we got married. We got married pretty quickly. And it was nice to have somebody to talk to about what training was like, because it's not easy. A lot of individuals get hired and about 50% still don't make it to fully certified air traffic controller once they get hired. It's just not a profession for everybody, and it's an up or out process. You get hired and you have to pass different check rides throughout your process till you're fully certified. So we lose about 50% through that process. So it was nice to have somebody that was fully certified to just kind of run things by and get advice from. It's a good thing that we didn't work close together. We worked both at Houston Center. So I was on the far east side of the airspace over New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Pensacola area. He was on the far west side, which is San Antonio all the way to Junction, Texas. So the west side of Texas into the New Mexico area. So we never talked to each other on landlines. We never had to coordinate things, which is pretty good because I think that's why we were able to date and then get married. If we'd had to work together that closely, I'm not sure, because I hear he was not always the most great coworker to coordinate stuff with, a little bit hard with some trainees and with others. And I don't know that I would have taken too well to that, but I don't know, who knows? I had a wonderful time training. I had a wonderful time learning from him, but we're now going through that as pilots. While we don't fly in the same plane, he flies with his CFI and I fly with mine. We talk a great deal about what we're learning and how we're doing things. And so it's kind of rekindled that world for us, which has been very nice.
I may have remembered a conversation that you and I had about there being a little bit of competition between the two of you with getting your pilot's license, and you felt like he had an unfair advantage because he wasn't traveling as much as you were. And I thought that was so funny.
He has all the time in the world to train all he needs to. And so he has many more hours than I do. In fact, just waiting for his examiner he's had to be rescheduled several times. So he's just waiting to get his check ride. So he's all done. He's just waiting for the last piece of it. But he's had, he doesn't say yes to everything. He likes being retired and golfing and fishing and being with the grandkids and now flying. He knows how to say no.
That's great. Well, you know how to say no now too, because we talked about that before we started recording. You have to ask yourself, what am I saying no to if I say yes to this thing? And that was a great concept to you that you told me you were going to write down. I love that for you, because saying no to something allowed you to say yes to that safety review board, which is just critical work.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
If you were going to give advice to a young person coming into aviation now, or a young leader in aviation who's really just starting to get their feet under them from a leadership perspective, from everything that you've seen? What would be those one or two pieces of advice that you consistently give to people?
Well, I'm gonna start with the piece of advice that you gave me before we even started this, was learn, a creative way, not just a creative. What are you saying no to? What did you say in order to say yes? Okay, I'm
What
going
are
to
you
go back.
saying? Yeah, what are you saying? Well, I already mentioned that. So what are you saying no to in order to say yes to this
Yeah.
thing?
So I'll start with, I love the piece of advice you gave me, because it has historically been a problem for me, is the saying no. I just love doing and learning all kinds of things. I love leadership roles and working as a team with all kinds of entities all the time. So being able to say no is important, how to do that. And so you've given great advice in that area. I wish I'd have had that advice 20 years ago. But sometimes you learn things, and you never quit learning. At the very end of my career, I continue to learn, and I, as I mentor new leaders or young women getting into different roles, I learn as much from them as I hope that they learn from me. They really have a wealth of knowledge themselves and bring a great perspective. So I think that if women are considering whether they have time to be a mentor to a young professional, they should figure out a way to make time for at least one individual, if not a couple. And I know it takes time, but it's well worth it. It's well worth it to that individual that you're mentoring, but it also is a way to grow yourself. The last person I spent some time with, she really taught me a lot, and that's valuable for me in my time as a leader and on different teams, what she was able to give to me. But I would say the biggest piece of advice that I would give to those that I mentor is to never give up. Don't get discouraged. I mean, it's going to happen. There's going to be days that you're very discouraged and you wonder, why am I doing this? Wouldn't my time be better spent doing something else? And maybe it is the case, but there are going to be days that you don't feel completely fulfilled, or that the work that you're doing is worthwhile. But it is, otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. Sometimes you have to refocus, but for the most part, even on those down days, you have to consider that you're doing it for the right reasons, and that this too shall pass. The second thing I think is there's a belief that at some point in your career, especially as you get to be 20, 30 years into whatever role you're in, that you quit learning. And that's not the case. There's just no such thing. You learn something new every single day. You learn new skills to be able to deal with different team members, to reflect on your abilities and yourself. You don't allow yourself to drift and do things that you normally wouldn't advocate or advise others on. So don't allow yourself to be a person that drifts out of that professional individual that that you are, especially when you have a down day.
Trish, I hear you saying something really, really, really powerful here. And I mean, I took a page of notes while you were talking, because I'm learning so much from you in this interview. But I think one of the really powerful things that you said is that we can react to things like a government shutdown where air traffic controllers are not getting paid would evoke a strong reaction in a lot of different people, men and women alike. I mean, there are people who aren't sure they're going to be able to feed their families in that time. And of course, that affects their job performance. And our safety is dependent upon their job performance. So what I'm hearing you say is not just the emotion, but the reaction piece of something. And I think, women maybe lead with emotion on that. Men tend to lead with a knee-jerk reaction, but it produces the same thing, which is not the result that we necessarily want. And I think that it's really powerful. And you mentioned this earlier in the podcast, and I've seen it to be a theme, to begin with the end in mind. And so I've seen, as you interact with press and as you interact with members of Congress, that you're very um, diligent and controlled and disciplined in the way that you address things in order to bring about a result and not to provoke a reaction in someone else. And I think it's that level head that probably made you an exceptional air traffic controller and is, maybe why there's a star named after you, and maybe why you're named to the FAA board and to the safety review board, and why you're representing the Western Hemisphere, because you have a very level-headed and very forward thinking, as in thinking toward the future way about you. And I think that that's exceptional. But, just to go back to my notes here, I'm also hearing you say that staying humble is important, that being a lifelong learner is important, that learning from those that you mentor and the importance of mentorship is important. And that once you set your mind to something and that you've thought about something diligently and kind of set that as a destination, that you don't get taken off course, if you will, by a discouraging day.
Mhm.
We may, as we're planning flights, we may end up in this position where, we get diverted a little bit by an air traffic controller or by a cloud or by other traffic or whatever it is. We get discouraged from the path that we're set on, but we still arrive at that same destination, or we arrive at another destination that's a safer destination for us to be at that particular time. And I think you applied that kind of thinking to life. And I think that's why you are where you are today.
That's an interesting analogy, because I've had to use that as well, that skill in my flight training, because I am an air traffic controller by trade. And you are used to having immediate response to a clearance that you give, turn right, descend, climb, and you get an immediate response. Life doesn't give you that, though. And so it's interesting, though, learning how to fly. There's so much I can't control. Even though when I was the executive vice president, I could control a lot more than I can control getting my flight lessons. I can't control if there's a mechanical problem. I can't control the weather. I can't control if the CFI decided to be sick or unfortunately was sick or not come to work. And now I can't fly this day. And you try not to let that affect your good mood and your willingness to, and your need to want to learn to fly by getting discouraged by all these things that you just have no control over. And so what I would have liked to have been certified much quicker, but again, I can't control my schedule. Sometimes I can't control all those other things I mentioned. And I think that's an important life skill set to have, is that there's only certain things that you can control, and those things that you can't, decide if you can influence them, and it can influence them in a positive way. You should try and do that. And if you can think outside the box and come up with some compromises or other ways of doing things or accomplishing your goals, then certainly that would be a course of action to take as well. But it's interesting that you can apply all of those different levels of skills that you need to use in all of our relationships and our positions, as simple as what I've learned in learning how to fly and not being able to keep the schedule I would like and getting done as quick as I would like to have been done.
Well, I know you're going to be flying all by yourself in no time. And, you mentioned something earlier that I want to give the flip side observation to. You indicated that it would have been really helpful if you had gotten your pilot's license earlier, because learning how to communicate as an air traffic controller from the perspective of what pilots are seeing and going through at the time is really valuable. But I would also encourage pilots to make friends with some air traffic controllers and fly with one of them, because it's so interesting to learn from Trish. My daughter and I flew with her last year on a pretty long cross country, and she was able to instruct us as to what's going on behind the scenes at center as we were traversing the country. And so she was able to give us tips on what's helpful to the controllers and what's a great way to ask things that might get us a little bit of a different result. And it is helpful to have her on the radios talking, of course, because everyone in the world knows Trish Gilbert and loves her in the air traffic control world. So very helpful for all of us to exchange ideas and to see things from each other's perspective, not just air traffic controllers becoming pilots.
Well, I would encourage any pilot out there that hasn't visited an air traffic control facility to take the time, call, and schedule time to be up in the tower cab or in the radar room. It is, they like to have you there, and I think it's an important way to see that side of it as well.
That's great. And so I know for a while we couldn't do that with COVID restrictions, but back to being able to have tours now.
Yes, now you can do it.
Fantastic. All of you have a homework assignment if you fly, for sure. Trish, thanks so much for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate all that you're doing for the aviation industry and keeping the skies safe for us and things moving as smoothly as possible in the FAA and around the world in civil aviation authorities. Thanks so much for taking the time to be with me today. How can people follow you or keep in touch with you?
Thanks, Renee, for your time. I am on social media. I'm on LinkedIn, or you can always email me at trish.gilbert@ifatca.org. trish.gilbert@ifatca.org. If you have any questions about air traffic control or anything aviation related, the wonderful thing about being retired now from the FAA and from my role with the National Air Traffic Controllers Association is I get to spend my retirement time doing the things I love the most, which is now flying, being with my grandkids, being an advocate for air traffic controllers, and really, really, really enjoy doing the work with René and others on trying to understand and improve the number of women in aviation careers and in the industry. It is so important that we increase those numbers and we break down those barriers, and whatever role anybody on here can play, being an advocate or an ally, is very, very important.
Well, Trish, thanks so much for being a part of the show today. If you like this show, please give it a 5-star review, share it, tell others about it. You can follow me on social media at René Banglesdorf on most social media platforms. Thanks so much.